Well, welcome to World Religions Discourse again, and today we will take a very brief look at Indigenous Native American religions. There are a lot of them, and they all have their own differences, so this will just be a summary overview, and just realize that each one is unique, and we need to always keep that in mind in studying religion as a whole, that there are variations within the individual religions, and then these traditional religions practiced by different tribal groups are going to have a lot of differences. And so keeping that in mind, we're just kind of doing an overview look at some of the things that you find in these various indigenous Native American religions. So let me share a screen with you, and we shall get started here. Here we go. All right, well, up here at the top you see a totem and some pictures from actual Native Americans in the US. But there's just a lot of diversity involved with them. Just as an example, this map here. This is a map of the various areas where there were certain tribal groups, like over here in the southeast. Here you've got the Cherokee, which was a major group, and I have Cherokee here circled, Kiowa, and Blackfoot. That's because these are my ancestors. I have people in my background that, particularly from Cherokee and Blackfoot, were the most recent. My grandmother, who, if you saw her, she kind of looked like an American Indian, but she showed me a picture of her grandfather, who was Blackfoot Indian, and I can remember seeing that as a young man. But in either case, you can just see all these different groups, and there's so many of them. There's such a diversity, and based on where they lived, you got down in the southeast, it was forest and lots of water. Where you get out in the Great Plains, it's a whole different situation. So what they did as a tribal group differed. The current total population of Native Americans in the United States is 6.79 million, which is about 2% of the entire population. About 22% would live on what are the tribal lands, or some reservations and so forth. I think some of the places they live, reservations weren't their original tribal land, but now they do have areas that they were pushed into, basically, and given that they have their own system of governance in those areas. But you can just see the diversity here. Native American religions, thought, and practices have much in common with the African traditional religion that we talked about before this. And there are the animistic beliefs are a big part of their religious worldview. Remember, it's animist belief in worship of spiritual beings, nature spirits, ancestral spirits that inhabit people, places, and objects. And you'll see some of that as we go through here. Again, I reminded, like we did under African traditional religion, totemism, belief in the kinship of a group of people with a common totem, that is an animal, a plant, that serve as a symbol of family unity or of a clan as a whole. And so here on the right, you can see an example of a totem. They were oral societies, as were the Africans. A lot of oral traditions handed down. Information prior to the Europeans coming is from archaeological discoveries. They didn't have written languages. Some missionaries, and then some who were Indians who were taught to be literate would write some things down about their religion and their culture, but the sources are very limited in that area. So with the many tribes, you got a lot of different views. A number of tribes have a creator God, but a lot of times he's not concerned with the daily lives of people. There's tribes that talk about the Great Spirit again, but exactly how this Great Spirit works varies. There's different levels of personal, how personal this Great Spirit is. But generally, that Great Spirit of God is remote and not highly involved in day-to-day life. There is divine and sacred power out there, but generally not looked at like a personal God. But the idea of a creator God does exist in nature in their thinking for the most part. The Lakota, for example, have a spirit world called Wakantanka, all that is mysterious and sacred, in other words. It's not a personal name, it's just a descriptive. Um, Wakantankan is eternal and powerfully created. He powerfully created the universe and is actually even a part of the universe. However, Wakantankan, this power, mysterious, sacred, is remote and not approachable. Again, it gets back to the personal God or non-personal God kind of thing, or personal power versus non-personal power. This is on the non-personal side. Rituals are actually not even performed for Wakantankan. Now, Wakanpi, within Wakantankan, are individual spirits and gods who exercise control over everything. They're not really comprehensible to ordinary humans, though they make themselves known to specialists like shamans and things. They're the ones that access this realm, just like in African traditional religion, we saw this, and they have ways of influencing that realm or explaining how this realm is affecting the current lives of people. In this relationship between the spiritual realm and humanity, remember in the worldviews, we have the upper level, the spiritual realm, then the lower level, then whether they overlap or not. Well, in the overlap, this is what's going as part of that. Any object or being that has influence over a person's life is a divine manifestation of divine power. Spirits, like in our African traditional religion, can be helpful or harmful. They can be appeased. In other words, if you've done something to offend them, you get the shaman to help you mend that and make it better. You can offend them, and so you have to be careful and not do things that are contrary to what they would prefer. The shamans are understood to possess this spiritual insights that's needed to act as intermediaries between the community and that sacred realm. And so these practitioners, and usually it's handed down within a family. The belief systems, again, a lot of variations, but generally speaking, life is living in harmony with nature. And of course, this is true of a lot of traditional cultures and religions, in the sense of they have to live within and live off the land. And so, living in harmony with nature is an important part. Death, for them, they had little fear of death. Some have the idea of two souls. One soul is the life or breath of the body, in other words, what animates us and breathes. But there's a free soul that wanders during dreams or leaves during sickness. And so that's at least how some of them would look at it. Not too far, think about Christianity, there is soul or breath that God breathed into us and made us living beings. But there's also the spirit, the spiritual aspect of us, made in the image of God, that is eternal aspect of us. And so you can see can be ties between some of their beliefs and Christian beliefs. After death, the free soul goes to the land of the dead. So this is much like after traditional religion, in the sense that they're there in the land of the dead, and it's usually a place of happiness and continuation of physical life or another plane of existence. But they do the same thing that they were doing in on Earth. They do now in the spiritual dimension with the ancestors. Um, Others sometimes think they only exist so long as they are remembered by the living people today. And so that's an aspect as well. And there are various things. There's some beliefs of, they need a guide to guide them through into this other world. And so animal or enemy sacrifice to act as a guide can be a part of their belief system. Source of revelation or enlightenment, basically it's communing with the spirits. Um, some groups use peyote, hallucinogenic, they got it from a cactus bud, and they would take that, and that would give them a high, and they would take that as a spiritual experience could take place in the midst of that uh, hallucinogenic activity. Another was the sacred pipe. Up here, you can see a sacred example of sacred pipe used to create a connection between Wankantanka and humanity. And so there was that kind of thing they would utilize in this relationship uh, and, and the spiritual realm, in other words. Sweat lodges. Sweet Lodge in this case. Sorry, misspelling. You know, it's a type of a sauna that they heat up rocks on a fire and then pour water on it and steam up the inside. And it was a cleansing the participants in their spirits, and you can see this sometimes. I've seen some television shows where they usually show these sweat lodges. And picture up here of an example of one. Um, some practice of what was called a vision quest. It's kind of a rite of passage to adulthood to kind of see, where you're going to go in life. So they seek a vision, and it's kind of they undergo kind of a symbolic death and rebirth, and so they kind of experience their guardian spirit. And of course, there will be variations on that, but again, this is a source of access to the spiritual realm and its influence on humanity. Uh, they want to live in harmony with the spiritual realm, and thus with nature. Uh, and because spiritual realm is involved in all of this as well. They don't just have spiritual realm up here and physical realm down here. It's spiritual realms all mixed in down here. And example, when they hunt, they kill an animal. They'll apologize for it and thank them for giving their life so they can have food. That kind of thing it can be is part of it. You can actually, I think I've seen a few movies where they actually show this happening. Uh, Encouraged to experience spirit world, the use of songs, drama, and visions can be a part of that. Sacrifice, not so much, but it's not blood sacrifices for sure, or not usual, although you see this practiced by the Aztecs and Mayans, known for their human sacrifices. They do have taboos, regulations that avoid certain actions that would offend the spirits. Avoidance of the dead, the spirit of the dead may remain nearby. And so there were certain ways that you had to handle the dead. And this is true in African traditional religion, although I didn't specify it. Historically there were certain things that you just didn't do around the dead, or certain people couldn't be near the dead after a person died. So a lot of religions have these taboos. Uh, Ceremonies and rituals are not necessarily worship, but more of a means of renewing a partnership between the people and the spirit world. And so you have various types of ceremonies. You can, have ceremonies for rain, dancing ceremonies. One that I think is, I'm not sure if that's the one depicted here or not. I can't remember. Sundance, an important ceremony among many of the Plains tribes, featuring self-inflicted wounds and show sacrifice to Walkentonka to benefit the tribe. In other words, they do these self-inflicted wounds and the ceremony to, the influence of that power, Walkentonka. Singing, fasting, ordeals of various kinds. There are certain rites of passage ordeals that may be a part of their belief system. The bathing or the sweet houses again, and observing taboo are all part of the rituals of the various tribes. The religious leadership, they don't really have any kind of priesthood. The closest you really get to religious leadership is the shaman or medicine man or woman. It gives insight to that spiritual realm through visions usually, but can curse and cause sickness. They do sometimes wield spiritual power. The ultimate goal in these religions basically is joining the ancestors. Is expected will happen, but they don't seek that, and they don't necessarily see it as a better place, necessarily like Christians see heaven, and it's described as a place that is so much better than our current world. So it's just going to another location doing basically the same thing, but ultimately that's where you're going to go because death is coming. Um, American Indians today, just going to kind of end with this. A lot of American Indians, like my ancestors, have entered the mainstream white culture, and in the historically, sometimes they were trying to be forced. They would force the Indians into integrating quicker than they would normally, and instead of letting them just voluntarily do it on their own time. And unfortunately, you have some abuses of this in the American history. So there are efforts of government to force assimilation. Uh, the For the Plains Indians, the killing of the buffalo, their main culture revolved around having that buffalo for meat and clothing and stuff. And the white man came in and on the trains and just obliterated the herds of buffalo. And of course, it wiped out a lifestyle in the process. People that time period, I don't know, just how aware of that they were and what that did to other people, but in either case, it's one of those things that would affect some of the Indians in that area. Peace treaties were used between the American government and these traditional people, and they would make a treaty that you can keep your tribal land and allow us to live around it. But the pressure of people, the white people moving in, oftentimes the government would renege on that, and and later they'd have to move whole tribal groups, like you got the Trail of Tears for the Cherokee Indians, moving them west, and a lot of people died on the way. There wasn't a lot of sensitivity towards them. Now, I should point out that in the midst of this, there were missionaries working with the Indians throughout this time period. and a good number of them really did try to do help and do some things. There were a few instances of people, missionaries that did not do things the right way. Uh, the reservation life protected against assimilation, and of course, a lot of these Indians wanted to keep their traditional life and their traditional culture, which often meant they also kept their traditional religion. And so they they would go to these tribal areas and they try to maintain that the traditions of their past to as much as they could in a highly fast changing world. So you have reservations which continue to exist to this day, and but there is a lot of poverty and high unemployment in the air, drug and alcohol abuse, along with domestic violence, and so there are issues, and that these Indian leaders are well aware of what was there. You have the casinos now that are being built in reservation, because even in states that don't allow gambling, because they're allowed by law, federal law, to be able to do what they want. They can make the laws where gambling is legal, and so, therefore you see that, and that's bringing in money, sometimes to help with this unemployment drug, but it also comes with gambling generally brings other problems as well. And so, so that, so today, you might not even recognize somebody that's an American Indian as one, but then there are those that, that are, you can see and you say, oh, I can see they might be an American Indian. But for the most part, there's been a lot of integration into just the American life as a whole. I did put a link here, what life on the Native American reservation is really like. It's a YouTube video that I thought was pretty good about, if you want to know more about it. We're not going to play it on here, but uh, it's that kind of thing. But that's just a brief overview of Indigenous Native American religion. And so that might help put it in perspective, put it alongside African traditional religion, because they so have so much in common as being indigenous religions that go back a ways. All right, well, that's bring us to the end of that, and we will begin moving in an easterly direction and talk about Eastern religions, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism. So I'll be signing off for now, and you all have a good day.